The dust from the stagecoach settled as Felicity Harmon's trembling fingers broke the wax seal of the letter that promised escape from the desolation of Copper Creek. Her heart raced with anticipation, unaware that behind her, a tall figure watched from the shadows of the general store's porch, his own letter burning a hole in his pocket, a letter that would change both their destinies. Felicity's eyes scanned the paper, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over her face. After 5 years of isolation in this desert town, her aunt in Boston had finally sent for her. The words blurred through her tears as she read the invitation to leave behind the grief and hardship that had followed her since her parents' death. Boston meant civilization, proper society, and perhaps even a suitable marriage, everything her parents would have wanted for her. The year was 1875, and the frontier town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, offered little for a 22-year-old woman with education and refinement. Since her arrival to manage her late father's small mercantile business, she had endured the harsh climate, crude surroundings, and unwanted advances from men who saw her only as a rare flower in a desert of masculinity. "Miss Harmon," a deep voice called from behind her. Felicity quickly folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, composing herself before turning to face Heath Sullivan, the town's most respected rancher. At 30, he had already established himself as a force in the territory, his cattle operation expanding every season despite the challenges of the land. "Mr. Sullivan," she acknowledged with a polite nod, though her cheeks colored slightly. Something about the cowboy always made her flustered, despite her best efforts to maintain the proper distance a lady should. "I see the mail's arrived," he said, his eyes lingering on the pocket where she'd stashed the letter. "Good news, I hope." There was something in his tone that suggested he already knew the answer, but that was impossible. She told no one of her correspondence with her aunt, not even Mabel, the widow who helped her run the store. "Just family matters," she replied vaguely. "Was there something you needed from the store? I was just about to open." Heath removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and features weathered by years under the Arizona sun. His eyes, however, remained a startling blue, clear and piercing as they studied her face. "As a matter of fact, there is something I need," he said, and for a moment, Felicity thought his voice carried an unusual hesitation. "But it can wait until you're properly open for business." She nodded and moved past him toward the store, aware of his gaze following her. Heath Sullivan had been nothing but polite in their interactions over the years, but there had always been an undercurrent of something unspoken between them. In the early days after her arrival, he had helped her navigate the complexities of frontier business, offering advice on suppliers and customers that had saved her from certain failure. As Felicity unlocked the store and began her morning routine, her thoughts kept returning to the letter. Her aunt's invitation offered a proper life, away from the dust and danger of the frontier. Yet something tugged at her heart, a reluctance she couldn't quite name. The bell above the door jingled and Heath entered, his broad shoulders nearly filling the doorframe. He placed his hat on the counter and produced a list written in a neat hand. "My foreman's wife wrote up what we need for the ranch this month," he explained. "We're bringing in extra hands for the spring drive, so it's more than usual." Felicity took the list, her fingers briefly brushing against his. The small contact sent an unexpected warmth through her hand, and she quickly pulled away, focusing intently on the paper. "This is quite extensive," she remarked, scanning the items. "It might take me a day to gather everything." "No rush," he replied. "I can send a wagon tomorrow." As she moved about the store, collecting the first items on the list, Heath didn't leave as she expected. Instead, he followed at a respectful distance, occasionally offering to reach items from the higher shelves. "I heard tell the Eastern stage was running full these days," he commented casually. "Lots of folks coming and going." Felicity stiffened slightly but kept her voice neutral. "Yes, the territory is changing, more people arriving each month, though just as many seem to leave." "And which way are you leaning, Miss Harmon?" His question was direct, his gaze even more so. She paused, a tin of coffee beans in her hand. I'm not sure I understand your question, Mr. Sullivan. I think you do. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage scent of him. Word travels, even in a place as spread out as this. The postmaster mentioned you've been receiving letters from Boston with increasing frequency. Anger flashed through her. Mr. Jenkins had no right to discuss my personal correspondence. He didn't mean any harm. People care about you here, Felicity. The use of her given name caught her off guard. In 5 years, he had never once addressed her so informally. Mr. Sullivan, Heath, he corrected gently. After all this time, I think we can dispense with some formalities, don't you? She set down the tin with more force than necessary. What I choose to do with my future is my concern alone. I've managed my affairs without assistance for 5 years now. A smile touched his lips, softening the weathered lines of his face. Not entirely without assistance. As I recall, there was the matter of Carson trying to swindle you on that first shipment of flour. Despite herself, Felicity's lips twitched. You did intercede on my behalf, which I appreciated. But that doesn't give you or anyone else the right to question my correspondence or my plans. Heath's expression grew serious. You're right, of course. It's just that, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words, which was unusual for a man known for his directness. Copper Creek would be diminished by your absence. Before she could respond, the door opened again, admitting Mrs. Abernathy, the banker's wife, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. The moment for private conversation had passed. Heath stepped back, replacing his hat. I'll send Hank with the wagon tomorrow afternoon for those supplies, Miss Harmon. Good day to you. As he left, Felicity felt strangely bereft, as though something important had been left unsaid. Throughout the day, customers came and went, but Felicity found her thoughts returning to Heath's words and the letter in her pocket. By evening, when she closed the store and retired to her small rooms above it, she took out the letter again, reading it more carefully. Her Aunt Margaret wrote of introductions to Boston society, of the cultural opportunities, of potential suitors who would appreciate a young woman of Felicity's background and education. It painted a picture of the life her parents had always envisioned for her, a life so different from the one she'd been living. Felicity moved to the small window that overlooked the main street of Copper Creek. The sun was setting, casting long shadows and bathing the simple buildings in golden light. In the distance, she could see the rolling hills that led to Heath Sullivan's ranch, the largest spread in the area. She thought of his piercing blue eyes, of the way he'd looked at her today, as though he could see right through her carefully constructed facade to the uncertainty beneath. 5 years ago, when she'd arrived in this dusty town, grieving and alone, she'd been determined to succeed out of sheer stubbornness. Her father's small store had been all she had left of him, and she'd refused to let it fail. Now, with the business stable and a small sum saved, she could leave without shame. Yet something held her back, something more than just pride in what she'd accomplished. The following afternoon, Felicity had the Sullivan Ranch order ready when Hank, Heath's foreman, arrived with the wagon. She was surprised when Heath himself appeared a moment later, dismounting from his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Thought I'd ride in with Hank, he explained, tipping his hat to her. Had some business with the bank anyway. They worked together loading the supplies, and Felicity couldn't help but notice how the townspeople watched them. In a place like Copper Creek, any interaction between an unmarried woman and a successful rancher sparked interest. When the wagon was loaded, Heath lingered, something clearly on his mind. Finally, he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. I have something for you, he said, his voice lower than usual. Would you do me the courtesy of reading it in private? Felicity stared at the envelope, her name written across it in a strong, masculine hand. What is this? Just some thoughts I've been meaning to share for some time, he replied. No obligation for a response, but I'd appreciate your consideration. Puzzled, she accepted the letter, slipping it into her pocket next to her aunt's invitation. Very well, Heath's expression lightened. Thank you, that's all I ask. He tipped his hat again, then mounted his horse. Good day, Miss Harmon. As he rode away with Hank and the wagon, Felicity felt the weight of both letters in her pocket. One promising a return to civilization and a life of comfort, the other a mystery that made her heart beat faster despite her best intentions. That evening, after closing the store, Felicity sat at her small desk and opened Heath's letter with fingers that weren't quite steady. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, each word seemingly chosen with care. "Dear Felicity," it began, the informality both surprising and warming her. "I am not a man given to flowery words or grand declarations. Life on the frontier teaches a man to be direct and honest, qualities I've always tried to maintain in my dealings. It is with that same directness that I write to you now. For 5 years, I have watched you build a life in Copper Creek against considerable odds. Your determination and grace have earned my deepest admiration. What began as respect has, over time, grown into something more profound, something I can no longer keep to myself. I understand you have received an invitation to return east, to the life you were born to lead. Before you make your decision, I ask only that you consider an alternative. My ranch is prospering, but a house without a heart is just a building. I am offering you not just my name and protection, but my heart and whatever happiness I can provide. I am asking you, Felicity Harmon, to consider becoming my wife. I don't expect an immediate answer. Take whatever time you need to consider your future, our potential future. Whatever you decide, please know that my respect and admiration for you will not change. With sincere affection, Heath Sullivan." Felicity read the letter 3 times, each reading making her heart beat faster. In all her time in Copper Creek, she had never allowed herself to consider Heath Sullivan as anything more than a respected businessman and occasional ally. She had been so focused on survival, on proving herself capable of managing alone, that she had deliberately closed herself off from any deeper connections. Now, faced with 2 very different futures, she found herself torn in a way she hadn't anticipated. Boston represented the life she had been raised to expect: cultured, comfortable, predictable. But Heath's offer meant building something new, something uniquely her own, with a man she had come to respect more than any other. Sleep eluded her that night as she weighed her options. By morning, she knew she needed more information before she could decide. She needed to understand exactly what Heath was offering and what she truly wanted. The opportunity came 3 days later when Heath returned to town. Felicity spotted him leaving the land office and, gathering her courage, approached him directly. "Mr. Sullivan Heath," she corrected herself when he raised an eyebrow. "Might I have a word with you in private?" His expression revealed nothing, but he nodded. "Of course. Would you care to walk?" They strolled to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. The spring air was mild, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I received your letter," Felicity began once they were beyond earshot of others. "I gathered as much," he replied, his tone gentle. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I need to understand something. Is this proposal motivated by genuine feeling or by a desire to keep the store operating in Copper Creek? Because if it's the latter, Felicity," he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "I have never been one to say things I don't mean. My proposal comes from the heart, not from any business consideration." "Then why now? You've had 5 years to speak, yet you choose the moment I might leave." Heath's eyes never left hers. "Sometimes a man doesn't recognize what's important until he faces losing it. I've watched you grow from a grief-stricken girl into a woman of remarkable strength. Each time I came to town, I found myself looking forward to our brief conversations, to the flash of intelligence in your eyes, to your quiet determination." He stepped closer, though he didn't touch her. "I should have spoken sooner, I know that now. But I wanted to be certain of my feelings, and I wanted you to have time to establish yourself, to know your own mind without pressure from anyone." Felicity studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity. She found none. "I have built a life here," she acknowledged softly. "Not the one I expected, but one I've come to value." "And yet you were planning to leave it behind," she sighed. "Boston represents safety, predictability. Here, everything is constantly changing, constantly challenging." Sometimes I wonder if I have the strength to face a lifetime of such uncertainty. Heath's smile was gentle. If anyone has the strength, it's you, but you wouldn't face it alone, not if you accepted my proposal. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. I need time to think, she said finally. This isn't a decision to be made hastily. Take all the time you need, he replied. My offer stands regardless of how long you take to consider it. As they walked back toward town, Felicity felt a curious lightness. No decision had been made, yet somehow the weight of uncertainty had lessened. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to look at Heath not as a customer or a business associate, but as a handsome, honorable man who was offering her a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. The following weeks brought spring storms and increased business as ranchers prepared for the season ahead. Felicity found herself watching Heath more closely during his visits to the store, noting the respect with which he treated everyone from the bank president to the young boy who swept the sidewalks. She observed how his men looked to him not with fear but with genuine regard, how the townspeople valued his opinion on matters affecting the community. One evening in late April, a violent storm swept through the territory, bringing flash floods that threatened the lower part of town. Heath arrived with a dozen ranch hands to help sandbag the creek banks and move goods to higher ground. Felicity worked alongside them, her skirts mudded and hair disheveled, passing sandbags down the line until her arms ached. When the immediate danger had passed, Heath found her sitting exhausted on a crate outside the store. You should rest, he said, his own face streaked with mud and sweat. You've done more than your share tonight. Felicity looked up at him, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity what she had been too cautious to acknowledge. This man, this strong, capable, compassionate man had become essential to her in ways that went far beyond business or friendship. I never answered your letter, she said quietly. Heath sat beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance despite their disheveled state. As I said, there's no rush. But there is, she insisted. I've been unfair, keeping you waiting while I struggled with a decision that, in my heart, I think I've already made. He went very still, his eyes fixed on her face. And what decision is that? Felicity took a deep breath. My aunt's invitation offered me a return to the past, to a life I was raised to expect. But that life belongs to a different Felicity, one who hasn't experienced what I have these past 5 years. She met his gaze directly. I've come to love Copper Creek and the life I've built here. More than that, I've come to care deeply for certain people here. Hope flickered in Heath's eyes. Certain people, a smile touched her lips. One person in particular, though he's testing my patience by making me say it explicitly. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he reached slowly for her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Felicity Harmon, he said, his voice rough with emotion, are you accepting my proposal? I am, she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Though I have conditions. His eyebrow rose. Name them. I want to keep the store, at least for now. It's important to me to maintain some independence. Heath nodded. I expected nothing less. The store is yours to manage as you see fit. And I want us to be true partners, she continued. I don't want to be just a rancher's wife, kept apart from the realities of your business. I want to understand all aspects of our life together. That's fair, he agreed. I've always valued your intelligence and practical nature. I would be a fool not to seek your counsel in all matters. Felicity felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Then yes, Heath Sullivan, I will marry you. His hand tightened around hers, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her right there, mud-streaked and exhausted as they were. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips in a gesture of old-world courtesy that touched her deeply. You've made me the happiest man in the territory, he said simply. The news of their engagement spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. Some expressed surprise, but most admitted they had seen it coming long before the couple themselves had recognized their feelings. Mabel, who had helped Felicity run the store for years, beamed with approval. It's about time that man spoke up, she declared. He's been moon-eyed over you since you arrived, though he tried mightily to hide it. Felicity found that hard to believe. We barely spoke in those early days. Actions speak louder than words, child. Who do you think convinced the suppliers to extend you credit when you first took over? Who made sure Carson and his ilk didn't take advantage of you? Heath Sullivan has been watching over you from a distance all along. This revelation gave Felicity much to consider as preparations for the wedding began. She wrote to her aunt in Boston, explaining her decision to remain in Arizona territory and announcing her engagement. The reply, when it came, was surprisingly supportive. "I had hoped to see you return to Boston," her aunt wrote, "but I cannot fault you for choosing love and a life of your own making. Your parents would be proud of the independent woman you have become." The wedding was set for June, allowing time for the spring cattle drive to be completed, and for Felicity to arrange for Mabel to manage the store during their honeymoon trip to San Francisco. As the day approached, Felicity found herself increasingly drawn to Heath's ranch, curious about the place that would soon be her home. The Double S Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime grazing land, with a large main house built of local stone and timber. Heath had constructed it 3 years earlier, replacing the original cabin with something more substantial. "I built it with the future in mind," he admitted as he showed her through the spacious rooms, "though I hardly dared hope you would be part of that future." The house was well designed but sparsely furnished, clearly missing a woman's touch. Felicity found herself making mental notes about curtains and rugs, about paintings that might brighten the walls and plants that could bring life to the empty corners. "It needs some softening," she observed. "But the bones are good," Heath laughed, a warm sound that she had come to treasure. "The bones are good, you make it sound like a horse you're considering purchasing," she smiled up at him. "Well, I am making a significant investment," his expression sobered. "The greatest investment is mine, Felicity. You're trusting me with your future, and I swear I won't let you down." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply, and for the first time since their engagement, she stepped into his arms without hesitation. His embrace was gentle but secure, and when he lowered his head to kiss her, she met him halfway. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory. But as his arms tightened around her, Felicity felt something within her respond with unexpected intensity. When they finally parted, both were breathing more quickly than the gentle kiss would seem to warrant. "I should get you back to town," Heath said, his voice rougher than usual, "before I forget myself entirely." Felicity nodded, though part of her wished they could remain in this moment, in the house that would soon be their home, exploring these new feelings without the constraints of propriety. But Heath was right, they had committed to doing things properly, and that meant waiting until their wedding day. As June approached, the entire town seemed involved in the wedding preparations. Women brought food and decorations, men constructed a dance floor in the town square, and children practiced songs for the celebration. Felicity found herself touched by the community's enthusiasm. Realizing how deeply rooted she had become in this place, she had once considered merely a temporary stop. The day before the wedding, a letter arrived from Boston, the final correspondence from her aunt before the wedding. Felicity opened it expecting well wishes, but what she found instead sent a chill through her. "My dear niece," the letter began, "I write with grave news. Your cousin Edward has passed away suddenly from typhoid fever, leaving no direct heirs. As the only remaining family connection, you are now the sole inheritor of his considerable estate, including the family home on Beacon Hill and investments worth over $50,000. The family lawyers insist your presence is required immediately to settle these affairs. I have taken the liberty of securing passage for you on the eastbound train departing from the territorial capital on June 15th. I understand this conflicts with your wedding plans, but surely your intended will understand the gravity of the situation. This inheritance represents security for you and any future children, a consideration that must take precedence over sentiment. I will expect you in Boston no later than the end of June. The family's future now rests in your hands." Felicity sat heavily in her chair, the letter trembling in her fingers. $50,000 was a fortune, enough to secure her future regardless of what happened. The practical part of her mind, the part that had kept her going through years of hardship, recognized the significance of such an inheritance. Yet the timing could not have been worse. To leave now, on the eve of her wedding, would be seen as the height of capriciousness. Heath would be humiliated, the town scandalized. Moreover, her heart rebelled at the very thought of postponing their marriage for financial considerations, no matter how substantial. She was still sitting there, letter in hand, when Heath arrived to escort her to the rehearsal dinner. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "Felicity, what's happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said finally, returning the letter to her. "This is significant news." He held up a hand. "You don't need to explain. $50,000 would secure your future in ways I cannot. The ranch is prosperous, but it doesn't compare to that kind of wealth." Felicity stood, anger flaring unexpectedly. "Do you think so little of me? Do you believe I would abandon our plans, our future, for money?" Heath's eyes widened slightly at her vehemence. "Of course not. But this isn't just money, it's your family legacy. I would understand if you felt obligated to see to these matters. The only obligation I feel is to the promises I've made to you, to myself, to the life we're building together." She stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. "I left Boston 5 years ago knowing I might never return. Nothing has changed except that I now have even more reason to stay." Relief flooded his features, followed quickly by concern. "But this inheritance, it's your birthright. I don't want you to regret turning your back on it." Felicity considered this. "Perhaps there's a middle path. I could write to my aunt, explain that I cannot come immediately, but will arrange to visit after our honeymoon. Surely the estate can be managed temporarily by the family lawyers until then." Heath nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. And if you need to stay longer in Boston to settle affairs, I could join you there after the fall roundup." The simple practicality of his solution, his willingness to accommodate her family obligations without drama or ultimatums, confirmed for Felicity that she was making the right choice. This was a man with whom she could build a life of mutual respect and support. "Then it's settled," she said firmly. "I'll write to Aunt Margaret tonight, but our wedding proceeds as planned." Heath's smile was slow and warm. "Have I told you today how much I admire your determination?" "Not in so many words," she replied, matching his smile. "But you might have another opportunity at the rehearsal dinner, which we are now late for." He offered his arm with exaggerated gallantry. "Miss Harmon, would you do me the honor of allowing me to escort you to dinner, where I plan to embarrass myself by speaking at length about your many fine qualities?" Laughing, Felicity took his arm. "Mr. Sullivan, nothing would please me more." The rehearsal dinner, held at the town's best restaurant, was a merry affair. Friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate the couple, offering advice both practical and humorous for their future together. Felicity observed Heath throughout the evening, noting how naturally he conversed with everyone, how genuine his laughter was, how his eyes repeatedly sought hers across the room as if to confirm she was still there, still his. Later, as he walked her back to her rooms above the store for the last time, the reality of tomorrow's changes settled over them both. "This time tomorrow, you'll be Mrs. Sullivan," Heath said softly, standing with her at the foot of the stairs. "And you'll be stuck with a wife who has opinions on everything from cattle breeding to curtain fabrics," she replied lightly. He caught her hand, his expression suddenly serious. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Felicity. Your independence, your intelligence, these are the qualities I fell in love with. I don't want a meek wife who merely echoes my thoughts." The casual mention of love caught her off guard. Though their engagement had progressed with increasing warmth and affection, neither had explicitly spoken of love until now. "You love me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Heath looked momentarily surprised, then rueful. "I've thought it so often that I assumed I'd said it aloud before now. Yes, Felicity Harmon, I love you. I have for longer than I care to admit, even to myself." Emotion welled up in her throat, making speech difficult. "I love you too," she managed finally. It scared me at first how much. I've been independent for so long that I feared losing myself in these feelings. He touched her cheek gently. You could never lose yourself, Felicity. Your strength of character is too deeply ingrained, and I would never want you to be less than who you are. They stood together in the soft evening light, the promise of tomorrow hovering between them. When Heath finally kissed her goodnight, it held all the tenderness and passion that words could not express. Until tomorrow, he whispered against her lips. Until tomorrow, she echoed, reluctantly stepping away. As she prepared for bed, Felicity took out both letters her aunt's with its news of inheritance and implicit pressure to return east, and Heath's original proposal, with its honest declaration and respect for her independence. The contrast could not have been clearer. One pulled her backward to a life predetermined by family expectations, the other invited her forward into a future of her own choosing. She placed her aunt's letter in a drawer and Heath's on her bedside table. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Heath Sullivan, not because society or family dictated it, but because she had found in him a partner worthy of her heart and her future. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the union. Felicity woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent the quiet morning hours writing in her journal, recording her thoughts on this momentous day. She had come to Copper Creek as a grieving daughter determined to honor her father's memory by preserving his business. She would leave it as a woman who had not only survived but thrived in this challenging frontier, who had found love and community where she least expected it. Mabel arrived mid-morning with several other women to help Felicity prepare. They brought flowers for her hair, a blue ribbon to satisfy the traditional requirement of something blue, and a pearl necklace that had belonged to Mrs. Abernathy's mother for something borrowed. Every bride should have pearls, Mrs. Abernathy declared, fastening the clasp around Felicity's neck. They symbolize purity and wisdom, both qualities you possess in abundance, my dear. The wedding dress itself was simple but elegant cream-colored silk ordered from San Francisco months earlier for an entirely different purpose. Felicity had originally intended it as a traveling dress for her return to Boston. Instead, with some alterations by the town's seamstress, it became the gown in which she would pledge herself to a future in Arizona. As the women helped her dress, Felicity found herself surprisingly calm. There were no last-minute doubts, no nervous flutter of uncertainty. When she finally stood before the mirror, the woman who looked back at her seemed both familiar and knew the same Felicity who had weathered 5 years of frontier life, yet transformed by the certainty of her chosen path. You look beautiful, Mabel said, uncharacteristic tears in her eyes. Heath Sullivan is a fortunate man. I think we're both fortunate, Felicity replied, squeezing the older woman's hand. The ceremony was held in the town's small church, filled to capacity with friends and neighbors. As Felicity walked down the aisle alone, there being no male relative to give her away, she kept her eyes fixed on Heath, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit. The expression on his face as he watched her approach was one she would remember all her life, a mixture of awe, tenderness, and barely contained joy. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, strong and steady. The minister's words washed over them as they stood together, but Felicity found herself focusing more on the warmth of Heath's hands, the unwavering certainty in his eyes, than on the formal language of the ceremony. When the time came to speak their vows, Heath's voice rang clear and true through the church. I, Heath Sullivan, take you, Felicity Harmon, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish and respect you, to support your dreams alongside my own, to be your faithful partner in prosperity and hardship for all the days of our life together. Felicity's own voice trembled slightly, not from uncertainty, but from the depth of emotion his words evoked. I, Felicity Harmon, take you, Heath Sullivan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you as your equal partner, to face whatever challenges come our way with courage and faith, to build a life of purpose and joy together, for as long as we both shall live. The exchange of rings, a simple gold band for her, a broader one for him, sealed their promises. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Heath's kiss was both tender and passionate, a perfect balance that seemed to encapsulate their relationship. The celebration that followed spilled from the church into the town square, where tables laden with food awaited the guests. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the air as the entire community joined in celebrating the union of two people who had earned their respect and affection. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Felicity found herself repeatedly swept into conversations with well-wishers, temporarily separated from Heath by the enthusiastic crowd. When she finally spotted him across the square, deep in conversation with an elderly rancher, their eyes met over the heads of the guests. His smile, intimate and full of promise, sent warmth spreading through her despite the distance between them. Later, as the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the square, Heath claimed her for a dance. As they moved together to the music, he held her closer than propriety might strictly allow, but no one seemed inclined to object. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. "Extraordinarily so, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, allowing herself to lean slightly into his embrace. "Though I'm beginning to think we might have too many guests at our wedding," he chuckled, the sound vibrating against her. "Impatient to be alone with your husband." "Perhaps," she admitted, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Is that improper of me?" Heath's arm tightened around her waist. "If it is, then I'm equally guilty of impropriety. I've been counting the minutes until I can take you home." The intimacy of his words sent a pleasant shiver through her. After years of maintaining careful distances and proper behavior, the freedom to acknowledge such feelings, even if only in whispers between them, was exhilarating. As the evening progressed, Felicity found herself increasingly aware of Heath's presence, of the brief touches they exchanged, of the knowledge that tonight would mark the beginning of a new intimacy between them. When he finally suggested they make their departure, she agreed with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Their exit was met with good-natured cheers and traditional well-wishes. Flower petals were thrown as Heath helped Felicity into the waiting carriage that would take them to the ranch to their home. The ride passed in comfortable silence, Heath's hand holding hers, both of them content to savor the moment without words. When they arrived at the ranch house, lights glowed welcomingly in the windows, the work of Heath's housekeeper, who had prepared the house for their arrival before discreetly departing for the night. Heath helped Felicity from the carriage, but before she could move toward the house, he swept her into his arms. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying a bride over the threshold," he said, his smile visible in the moonlight. Felicity laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition." He carried her easily up the steps and through the doorway, setting her gently on her feet in the entrance hall. The house felt different now, warmer, more welcoming, filled with the promise of shared moments to come. "Welcome home, Felicity," Heath said softly, taking her hands in his. "Home," she repeated, testing the word and finding it fit perfectly. "Yes, I believe it is." The months that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery as Felicity and Heath built their life together. Felicity divided her time between the ranch and the store in town, which she continued to manage with Mabel's assistance. Heath, true to his word, sought her input on ranch matters, valuing her practical mind and fresh perspective. Their evenings were spent in comfortable companionship, reading aloud to each other, discussing the day's events, planning for the future. And their nights. Their nights were a revelation of intimacy and connection that deepened their bond in ways Felicity had never imagined possible. In late summer, Felicity traveled to Boston with Heath to settle her inheritance. The city of her childhood seemed smaller somehow, more confined than she remembered. Her aunt, initially cool at Felicity's refusal to return permanently, gradually warmed to Heath's straightforward charm and obvious devotion to her niece. "I can see why you chose him," she admitted one evening as they sat in the parlor of the Beacon Hill home that now legally belonged to Felicity. "He has substance, unlike so many of the young men in Boston society." Felicity smiled, watching Heath across the room as he examined a painting with genuine interest. He's the most honorable man I've ever known, and he truly sees me for who I am." Her aunt patted her hand. "Then you found something precious indeed, my dear, far more valuable than this house or any inheritance." After 6 weeks in Boston, the legal matters were settled. Felicity arranged for the house to be maintained by a caretaker, with quarterly reports sent to her in Arizona. The bulk of the inheritance was invested conservatively, providing a safety net for their future, but not altering their day-to-day life. A portion was set aside to expand the store in Copper Creek, adding a section for books and educational materials that the growing community desperately needed. Their return to Arizona was a homecoming in the truest sense. As the ranch came into view after the long journey, Felicity felt a surge of contentment. This was where she belonged, not in a Boston mansion surrounded by the trappings of old wealth, but here in this wild, beautiful country, building something meaningful with the man she loved. Heath must have sensed her thoughts, for he reached across the carriage to take her hand. "Glad to be home." "More than I can say," she replied honestly. "Boston was interesting, but it's not home anymore. This is." His smile warmed her more than the Arizona sun. "I missed waking up beside you in our own bed," he admitted. "The Boston house is impressive, but it never felt like ours." "That's because it isn't," Felicity said simply. "It's a piece of my past, useful for what it can provide for our future, but not where our life together belongs." Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Felicity discovered she enjoyed these quiet periods, when the world narrowed to just the two of them and the essential tasks of maintaining life in harsh conditions. They spent evenings by the fire, planning spring plantings and discussing improvements to the ranch house now that Felicity had a better sense of what would make it truly their home. It was during one of these peaceful evenings, as Christmas approached, that Felicity shared news that would change their lives forever. "I have a gift for you," she said, setting aside her sewing. "Though it won't arrive until summer." Heath looked up from his ledger, puzzled. "Something you ordered from back east," she shook her head, suddenly nervous despite her certainty that he would be pleased. "Something a bit more locally produced." He set the ledger aside, giving her his full attention. "You have me intrigued, Mrs. Sullivan." Taking a deep breath, Felicity moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "Heath, I'm going to have a baby. Sometime in July, according to the doctor in town." For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to wonder in rapid succession. Then he gathered her into his arms with such gentle reverence that tears sprang to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The awe in his voice confirmed what Felicity had already known, that Heath would be an exceptional father, just as he was an exceptional husband. When he drew back to look at her, his eyes shone with a mixture of joy and concern. "Are you feeling well? Should you be resting more? What did the doctor say?" Felicity laughed, touching his cheek affectionately. "I'm perfectly healthy, and Dr. Morgan says everything appears normal. I don't need to change anything yet, though I might need to reduce my time at the store as summer approaches." Heath nodded, his hand moving to rest gently over her still flat stomach. "Whatever you need, whatever will keep you both safe and well, that's what we'll do." The tenderness of the gesture moved her deeply. "I think we're going to be good at this," she said softly. "Being parents, I mean. You will be an amazing mother," he replied with certainty. "As for me, I'll learn as we go. My own father wasn't much of an example to follow, but I know what not to do, at least." Felicity covered his hand with hers. "You're already a good man, a good husband. Being a good father will come naturally from that foundation." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Heath's arm curved protectively around her, Felicity reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. The letter from her aunt that had once seemed to offer escape now appeared in a different light, not as a missed opportunity, but as the catalyst that had forced both her and Heath to acknowledge feelings too long unspoken. Had she taken the eastbound train, as her aunt suggested, she would have missed all of this, the deep satisfaction of building a life with a man who respected her mind as well as her heart, the joy of creating a true partnership based on mutual trust and admiration. the anticipation of expanding their family in this home they had made together. "What are you thinking about?" Heath murmured, his voice drowsy with approaching sleep. Felicity smiled in the darkness. "About letters, actually. Letters, hum. About how sometimes the most important message isn't the one written on paper, but the one written in our hearts, if only we're brave enough to read it." He pulled her closer. "That's rather poetic for a practical businesswoman," she chuckled softly. "Perhaps you're a bad influence on me, Mr. Sullivan?" "I certainly hope so, Mrs. Sullivan," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I certainly hope so." Spring brought new growth to the land and increasingly visible changes to Felicity's body. Heath watched with fascination and pride as their child grew within her, his protectiveness tempered by respect for her continued independence. She continued to manage the store 3 days a week, now with an assistant learning the business under her guidance, and maintained her role in ranch decisions, though Heath insisted on handling the physical aspects of the work entirely himself. Their days fell into a pleasant rhythm: mornings spent discussing ranch matters over breakfast, afternoons devoted to their separate responsibilities, evenings reuniting to share the day's events. As Felicity's pregnancy progressed, they began preparing the nursery, converting a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a cheerful space for their child. Heath proved surprisingly skilled at woodworking, crafting a cradle from local pine with careful attention to detail. Felicity sewed curtains and bedding, incorporating fabrics she had ordered from both San Francisco and Boston, blending the influences of East and West, just as their child would represent a union of different worlds. In early July, as the summer heat intensified, Felicity began to slow her activities. The baby was active now, kicking vigorously at all hours, and she found herself needing more rest. Heath arranged for Mabel to stay at the ranch to help during the final weeks, a gesture Felicity appreciated as her energy waned. "I feel so useless," she complained one evening as Heath massaged her swollen feet. "I've never been idle like this before." He smiled, his hands gentle on her skin. "You're hardly idle. You're creating a human being, which seems like the most important work imaginable." Felicity sighed, acknowledging the truth in his words. "I suppose so, but I miss feeling capable and strong." "You are the strongest person I know," Heath replied seriously. "And soon enough, you'll be back to running circles around all of us. For now, consider this a well-deserved rest before our lives become considerably more complicated." She laughed at that. "Fair point. Once this baby arrives, I suspect peaceful moments will be in short supply." Their daughter arrived on a scorching July afternoon, after a labor that tested even Felicity's considerable endurance. Heath remained by her side throughout, defying convention to support his wife through each difficult hour. When the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in Felicity's arms, the exhaustion of the long day dissolved in a wave of overwhelming love. "She's perfect," Heath whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched their daughter's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." Felicity looked up at him, seeing tears in his eyes that matched her own. "We did this together," she said softly, "created this miraculous little person." They named her Hannah Margaret Sullivan, Hannah for Heath's mother, Margaret for Felicity's aunt who had inadvertently brought them together. With her father's blue eyes and a wisp of her mother's auburn hair, she seemed the perfect blend of both parents from the start. The first months of Hannah's life transformed the ranch house in ways both subtle and profound. The practical order that had characterized their home gave way to a more flexible approach as they adjusted to the unpredictable rhythms of an infant. Heath proved to be a devoted father, willing to walk the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night or change diapers without complaint. "You're rather good at this," Felicity observed one evening as she watched him gently rock Hannah to sleep, his large hands cradling the tiny girl with perfect confidence. He smiled, not taking his eyes off his daughter's face. "She makes it easy. She's so real, so present in every moment. I find myself wanting to be fully present with her too." This thoughtful observation, so typical of the man she had married, reminded Felicity again of how fortunate she was. Heath approached fatherhood as he did everything else in their life together, with complete commitment and genuine joy in the experience. As Hannah grew from infant to toddler, Felicity gradually resumed her responsibilities at the store, now bringing her daughter with her 2 days a week. The customers delighted in watching the little girl progress from crawling among the fabric bolts to toddling down the aisles, her father's blue eyes taking in everything with intense curiosity. The inheritance from Boston allowed them to expand both the ranch operations and the store. Heath purchased additional grazing land and improved their cattle stock, while Felicity added the book section she had envisioned and expanded their inventory to serve the growing community. Their prosperity benefited not just themselves but Copper Creek as a whole, as they employed more people and invested in local improvements. On Hannah's 3rd birthday, as they celebrated with a small gathering at the ranch, Felicity found herself watching Heath with their daughter, marveling at the man he had become in the years of their marriage. Always honorable and kind, fatherhood had softened something in him, bringing out a playfulness and patience that complemented his natural strength. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Hannah was asleep, they sat together on the porch enjoying the cool evening air. Happy. Heath asked, taking her hand as he often did in quiet moments. "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, that we've built all this together," he nodded, understanding as he always did. "I know what you mean. When I think of how close we came to missing this." Felicity squeezed his hand. "But we didn't miss it. You were brave enough to write that letter, to offer an alternative to the path I thought I had to take. And you were brave enough to choose the uncertain future over the safe return to your past," he added. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Finally, Felicity turned to him with a smile. "I have news," she said, echoing words she had spoken years before. Heath's eyebrow rose. "More locally produced gifts on the way," she laughed, delighted that he remembered. "Indeed, expected to arrive in early spring, according to Dr. Morgan." Joy spread across his features as he gathered her into his arms. "Another baby. Hannah will be thrilled to be a big sister." "I think so too," Felicity agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Our family is growing, just like everything else we've built together." As they sat entwined on the porch of the home they had created, Felicity thought again of the 2 letters that had shaped their destiny: her aunt's invitation to return to a life prescribed by others, and Heath's offer of a future they would define together. In choosing the latter, she had found not just love but purpose, not just security but genuine fulfillment. The child growing within her now was another chapter in the story they were writing together, a story of love discovered in unexpected places, of courage to choose the harder path when it led to greater joy, of building something lasting and meaningful in a land that demanded strength and perseverance. "I love you, Heath Sullivan," she said softly into the quiet night. "For the man you are, for the life we've created, for everything that lies ahead." His arms tightened around her, his voice warm against her hair. "And I love you, Felicity Sullivan, more with each passing day." Under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by the land they had tamed together, they sat wrapped in each other's arms, 2 people who had found in each other not just love but true partnership, not just passion but deep and abiding friendship. The letters that had once offered divergent paths had led them instead to this shared journey, one they would continue to travel side by side for all the days of their lives.